dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it.
Hello, listeners, and hello, Matt. Matt is coming to us
Rob.
live.
Rob,
Go ahead.
what makes a man turn neutral? Lust for gold, power? Or are you just born with a heart full of neutrality?
Matt, if I don't survive this podcast, tell my wife I said hello.
Yes, I'm live from the most neutral part of the state of Texas.
Yeah, so tonight we're going to be talking about generic neutral systems, beige alert type of things. We're going to be discussing the firm middle ground, the indistinguishable center of role-playing game systems.
Games that will make you say, I have no strong feelings one way or the other.
All we know about these games that our gut says maybe. No, we're talking about generic systems, and it is not as bad as we're making it sound. There are a lot of generic systems in TTRPGs, and we have discussed a few of them and played in them and even enjoyed them, but we have not sort of done a rundown of generic systems such that they are, and I think this is long overdue because there are a lot of them, and playing in one and running games in one is distinctly different from your standard role-playing game experience, which usually comes with a setting and a campaign attached, or at least a strong suggestion of one.
Yeah, and I think this episode sort of came from the feeling that I had, Rob, which is people are like, oh, I have this cool idea for a game. It's my own thing. And that's super dope. It's so fun when a dungeon master comes is like, oh, I've got my own campaign setting. It's completely different. It's my own like world. And I can't wait to see what my players do. And they say, well, what system should I use? And kind of people just say, well, just pick any generic system. And to me, that's like, oh no. They're all very different from each other. Yeah. You're going to get a very different result. So you want to think about which generic system you might want to pick.
Yeah. If you were going to go with a generic system, they are absolutely not interchangeable. And I think this is something we're going to explore in this episode because theoretically, you might think that generic systems would be interchangeable. If they're supposed to be a system that you can use to run any setting, any type of game, then why couldn't you use Fate to play the same thing as Savage Worlds, to play the same thing as Tiny D6 or the Cortex system? But as it turns out, that is not the case. Well, this is an opinion, I suppose, but in my opinion, and I think we will demonstrate this, each generic system may theoretically be generic, but they are not generic in the same way. All systems are like Matt, but all generic systems are unhappy in the same way.
That's correct.
Oh, sorry, all systems are different. I fucked up the quote. You know what I meant. You know what I meant, listeners.
Yeah. Tolstoy, look it up. I think similar to that is that we are coming from the perspective that Rob and I care a lot about systems, and you may not. And if you don't, fine. This advice will still be useful to you. But I think Rob and I's ideal type of RPG is one in which the setting and the system have been meticulously crafted together where they perfectly fit, right? If you want to play a fantasy game, well then, play Pathfinder 2E or Daggerheart, where the magic system tells you something about this fantasy world. But considering the fact that you may have your own setting and you're not going to take the time to write a entire system just for your game, a very reasonable position to have. You might want to just pick one of these generic systems.
Yeah. And I do think that it's demonstrable that most people enjoy a system that comes with a setting attached, and the two are melded together. If we look at the most popular RPGs of the past 10, 15 years, all the standout examples are often or are generally something with a very strong and very closely intertwined system and setting, something like Blades in the Dark or Stone Top, right? People love to have a system with a meticulously crafted and interwoven setting aligned with it. But that does not mean that there's not a purpose or a time for a generic setting. But if you're going to grab one, you need to go into it with both eyes open, because there's a lot going on, I guess.
Cool. I think, and we're going to try and judge these on, at least in my mind, two basic criteria. Is it good or does it suck? So that's useful
Right.
for everyone.
Right.
And then, like, what types of games and what types of stories and campaigns and players is it best for? Which is very subjective from table to table.
Right.
And I think we'll say, like, to narrow our focus down, what a generic system is not. Like, there are a lot of systems out there, from the general powered by the apocalypse family of games to the Year Zero engine to the D20 SRD, that are like pretty generic and people have made lots of different settings for. But, you know, those are all systems designed with specific games in mind, and you would have to do a ton of work, maybe not a ton, but a good amount of work to take the generic Year Zero engine and make it work for one particular type of setting. So generic systems are like, plug and play, like you're ready to go. You pick which things you're using from this game, and then it's time to start.
Yeah. And not to bury the lead here, but one of the things that I think we have learned, or the conclusion that we've come to, is that even though each of these generic systems can theoretically be used across a wide variety of settings, they are typically good at, I think, one type of gameplay or a specific sort of tranche of stories, like exploration or pulp adventure or cinematic narrative drama,
internal character conflict,
right?
External party conflict, that kind of stuff.
There are in some cases science fiction and fantasy and modern stories that fit within that narrative style, but that doesn't it's not the same thing as being able to use that generic setting to play any type of game. There are exceptions to this, and you may disagree, but let's, I think that's kind of the key to understanding generic systems, is like, what type of story, what type of game are they best used for? So do we have any more like big picture advice, or shall we jump into the specifics, Matt?
Let's get into some generic systems. Get our fingers
talk about
deep in the mud here.
Let's get started with our most important and most popular generic system, which is Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. Hey-o!
No.
Just kidding, listeners. Don't do that. That's not a generic system. Please stop. Please don't do that.
Yeah. Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition is made for playing a game called Dungeons and Dragons. And while you could, and no one will legally stop you from playing a game that uses 5e to tell whatever, noir detective story that you're using, and you will probably still have a good time, because role-playing games are fun and friends are fun to hang out with. It's probably not the best system for that kind of thing. So we won't stop you, but it's not made.
The TTRPG police are not going to bust down your door. You can do whatever you want, but we think you'd have a better time doing something else. But that's okay. Do what you want.
All right. What's our real first system, Rob?
Do you want to launch us with one of the OGs? Not necessarily the OG, but a long running generic system. One of the granddaddies of it.
Okay, like an older one. Let's talk about GURPS, which is fun to say.
I was going to say, my favorite thing about GURPS is saying GURPS.
Yeah. It's great that you can say GURPS and you know what it means. It stands for Generic Universal Role-Playing System, or GURPS, by fellow Texan. I'm here in his hometown of Austin, Texas, broadcasting live. That's why I'm here in Austin, is because Steve Jackson is from Austin. It's by Steve Jackson's Games, 1986.
Steve Jackson, the only game designer to have his offices raided by the FBI. A legend.
Very cool. Legend. Super nice guy. I met him once. He was very, very nice. And
everyone says so.
This game came out when I was born. So it's been around for a really long time. The basic idea of GURPS is that you can play anything, and when you buy a GURPS core book, there are rules for medieval weapons and fantasy spells and psionics and spaceships and everything, and it's all built around a simple 3d6 roll under system. That's been slightly modified over the years, but hasn't really substantially changed in a crazy thing. Characters are built in a very complicated point buy system, so they can be incredibly customizable. The fun thing about modern GURPS, so I'm talking for this episode, I reread the 4th edition GURPS basic set, is that when you make a check, if the difficulty is 10 and you roll a 14, then you've got a degree of success of 4. So you can also, your roll generates more than one thing, which is super cool and super nice. Rob, do you have any other big points about GURPS?
No, only that the original Fallout was supposed to be made with GURPS, but they couldn't come to an agreement with Steve Jackson Games, so they just sort of hacked it into what we now know to be the Fallout system with its stats and percentiles, and it's the bones are clearly there, but yeah.
The bones are there. You have a nice bell curve with this 3d6,
mm-hmm.
right? You've got a chance for a critical when you roll a 3 or a 4. And, it can get complicated when you're looking at the way the game works is like your base skill plus your compared to your effective skill, and like temporary modifiers change your base skill to effective skill, and you need to kind of know what your effective skill is. And then the complicated part of the game is that you have a lot of different attributes, and then you have derived attributes, and then you have advantages and disadvantages. So like if you want to build a character that has no sense of smell or something, you get like bonus points for that. Right. If you, or some other disadvantage that you can take from a huge list, you'll find one that's applicable to your type of campaign. So you can really build characters where you have mechanics that reflect their in-story, in-campaign abilities. The downside of that is that the sort of onboarding of the rules system and to I think new players can be a little difficult, despite the sort of straightforwardness of all of the roles and the fact that the rules are quite extensive. Like, yeah. Oh, Rob, were you afraid that there wasn't rules for like 3/4 cover versus half cover, and double actions and movement and parrying versus dodging? Oh yeah, there's rules for all that. It is a highly detailed rule system. The other big disadvantage for GURPS, in my mind, is just the rules. The rules themselves. GURPS 4th edition, if you want to get the like newest edition, is like 580 pages. They are not written in a way that is engaging.
Like it does not help you at all.
You read through half of the book, which is character creation, before you get to what do actually roles mean and how do you do them and what is the game about. But I think the basic mechanics of GURPS and why it's had such staying power is the core mechanic of 3d6 roll under is super straightforward and makes a lot of sense.
I appreciate GURPS for what it is. I mean this. I don't mean this as an insult. It is very like engineer brained. This is very like focused purely on how mechanically everything works, to I think the detriment of the system as it is. But as a sort of like neutral skeleton for building on top of, I mean, I think, in my opinion, this is the most effectively generic system that we're going to talk about. It gives you very little in terms of like what setting or what type of game you should play, except that it will probably involve a lot of combat because there's a lot of rules for shooting things and cover and whatnot. But it is a very like it is something that you can build on top of if you want to do that easily, because it is really just like a very robust skeleton, which is both a good and a bad thing.
I guess the other main advantage is that if you want to buy a rule book that has rules for psychic powers and superpowers and spells and the difference between like a Desert Eagle and a Glock in terms of like damage, like it has all of those rules.
Yeah.
I think the disadvantage is if you want something that's like, so you have to do a lot of cutting for what is your game is about. The disadvantage, and I think this will drive us to our big question for all these games, is what type of campaign would you want to use this for? You probably wouldn't want to use it for a campaign that's like very like loosey goosey, very story driven. Like you want it is trying to be a pretty decent physics reality character simulator, which I think in my mind is only for certain types of campaigns.
Yeah. It is from an older era of role-playing game creation, which has its ups and its downs. But it's a good system and a functional one, and good games have been built on top of it. I would say that unless you are really into like the nitty gritty and you want to build like a high combat, military sim, science fiction, modern type of game, I'm not sure that the GURPS is going to be the one for you. But it is I think it's a good functional system. It's hard to use unless you also have engineer brain, in which case knock yourself out. Yeah.
Engineer brain is the correct way to think about the GURPS system. I would, on our other axis, does it suck or not? The way the rules are written, it's very comprehensive. It is very tough to learn. It is not well written. The art, really, despite 4th edition coming out pretty recently, is, in my opinion, not great. So I don't know. I could only rarely see myself recommending GURPS to a group who has not played GURPS already.
Like I said, I appreciate it for what it is. I don't want to say it sucks, but it is a product of its time. So I also don't want to say it's good. Yeah, I would not recommend it to. I do think there are like really, really specific use cases where GURPS is perfect, but most people don't want to play those games, and I cannot, in good conscience, recommend it for most things.
Okay, what generic system should we talk about next?
All right, let's go in a different direction. Let's talk a little bit about Genesis. Let's talk about the Genesis system, which is spelled with a Y.
Let there be light.
Cool, and
that is
I don't
cool.
know. Yeah, so the Genesis system, which emerged from the Fantasy Flight Star Wars game, but now has expanded to include things like Game of Thrones and Twilight Imperium and a handful of other IPs and properties. And Genesis is known for a number of things, but I would say that sort of the core, differentiator of Genesis is its narrative dice system. And Genesis comes with proprietary dice with little pips on them. You don't have to use them. You can use sort of a comparison between like a regular D6, their D6s, or make your own. It's fine, but they are pushing you on their proprietary dice, and the pips are things like advantage and threat and triumph and despair, which are basically +1, -1, or like super +1, -1, and these are used.
Like they're success. You roll you roll a success die. And then now you have a success, right? And some skill checks might make you add certain dice to your pool, which means, you could fail or you could succeed with a cost, which I think is super cool.
It is super cool. There are different sizes of dice with different arrangements of pips upon them, which means that you're, depending on all the things you might marshal for a given roll, your skills, your allies, your special abilities, any sort of like narrative points that you have, you might be rolling a big handful of different dice and looking what comes up. But these are basically, the thing is, this is basically a success fail with a bunch of extra steps. Like it's not functionally different from something like Powered by the Apocalypse or Fate. And I don't mean that as like an insult, but like I think all the like nifty icons, which are nifty and fun, sort of obscure the fact that this is just a relatively simple success fail, compare the two numbers system. The combat and skills are fast and punchy in Genesis. It's got, a few other things, but really it's, in my opinion, it's sort of like a narrative system with a few extra dice rolling steps. It feels a bit crunchier than something like Fate, but ultimately it's still a pretty narrative heavy system.
Yeah. I think the cool thing is that while you have like traits that represent what die you roll for certain types of checks, right? Oh, I'm good at being big. Therefore, my die is the bigger proprietary die with more success by default. The system is the real bread and butter is that like characters can have special traits where in certain situations this works like this die and you can add an extra one of these. And and then the advantage like in actual play is that a roll tells you a lot about how to interpret it in the form of the story. Well, you got 3 successes and only 1 threat, and so this means that this is going to happen, right? And that a clever game master can really spin this into making the story more challenging or interesting for the players.
I also think that these dice and the various outcomes do give a lot of like interesting design space. So, you might have something on your character sheet or an ability that says when you get a despair, this happens, or when you get, 2 triumphs, this happens, or, when you roll this many on a die, you get it to activate a certain special thing. There's a bunch of cool abilities and things that can happen based on sort of the configuration of the dice, which is cool and fun in my opinion. And I like the proprietary dice. We've talked about Genesis before. I think the rolling the dice is fun. I think it makes a lot of sense assembling your pool. And like Matt said, every dice roll tells you a lot about what happens and your character. So I think I really like the Genesis system. I think that it's fun. but I also like rolling dice, and I'm aware that I'm being manipulated by shiny dice. So I don't want to lead you astray, listeners.
Well, I think it gets to a fun point, which is that all of the numbers in most systems are completely meaningless, right? The numbers are a means to an outcome. Why not skip the numbers and go straight to the outcome?
The outcome.
The downside of that is you have to buy special dice. The upside is just buy the dice. You buy dice anyway. And I think for like a generic system, this is very appealing in that if you're running your own thing and no one has any context for anything, why not? Right? It's a decent system. Now, I would say, well, what would you rate its like level of complexity? Are we picking up and playing this as the game master after an hour of reading, or is it a little bit more than that?
I want to say that, like, in theory, it should be the type of game that you can just like pick up and play after, a brief rules discussion. Having gone through this with new players, I think in practice, it's different enough that, and there's enough weird rules interactions that it can be complicated. It's definitely not on like the higher end of complexity, but it is not as simple, I think, as it would like to be.
Right. I think the complexity comes from also a lot of the combat and action systems, which can become quite complex despite remaining abstract. The advantages that will lead to like very interesting combat action systems. And then in the generic Genesis rule system, there is a substantial amount written for character building options besides just what are your attributes that determine the base values of the dice. And then because it's, fancy in that you don't just have successes and failures, you have advantages and kind of disadvantages resulting from this situation. There's a bunch of, I think, very good advice, but very complex advice on how to game master that creatively. We have a whole episode on the Genesis system.
We do.
And I think it's because it is a complex system, it's hard to break down in our like 10-minute recap here. But
I do think that the combat, like Matt's right, the combat can get complicated. The combat is fun though. It's one of the better parts of the system. I think it makes combat goes quickly, but lots of interesting things happen. And it's actually
things.
Dramatic. That's right. It's fun to actually play, which is not true of a lot of combat systems. But Matt's right that the options, both when it comes to character creation and to combat, really burden the sort of like core rules, which is not a bad thing, because I think one of the things that I want to say about Genesis is that it does combat better than other things. This is a good system for pulp, adventure, high octane, whatever. It really shows its Star Wars roots. I think it's best for that. You can use it to play other things, but a slow paced narrative, character focused drama, I probably just is gonna, you're gonna chafe against the rules for Genesis,
Yeah, I think the drama you get a lot of in the Genesis system is a fight never just has to be a fight. Like weird, a new complication will happen. It's a real, you get an additional threat and the GM can be like, oh, they fly now? They fly now? Yeah, they fly now.
That's right.
So it gives you a mechanic for doing that type of shit.
Right.
Okay. We like many aspects of the Genesis system. It's good for the types of games Rob's discuss, especially showing its Star Wars roots. So if you want a game that feels like Star Wars, that's kind of what it was designed for before it became a generic system. Anything else on this system? Space
opera, action, pulp adventure. No, it's good. I like the dice. It's fun. It's definitely, I think this is very comfortably like middle of the road in terms of accessibility and complexity, which is actually like kind of a underpopulated space in the TTRPG. They've got a lot of high crunch and a lot of low crunch systems, and some that sort of like aspire to be in the middle but fail. I think Genesis falls very, very comfortably in the middle, which is, which I like.
That is absolutely true. We don't get a lot of middle brow in crunch systems. It's hard to fit. Okay, Rob, let's see. Why don't I go to another system that is very similar to GURPS? I'm talking about the hero system, Rob.
Hero system.
Why would you want to play the hero system instead of GURPS? What is the hero system? I don't remember, Rob, whether GURPS forked off of or was inspired by the hero system's earlier non-generic version, Champions, which is a superhero game, or it's something like the other way around, but they're very similar systems. The hero system had a generic version since the 90s. It's in its 6th edition now, which is from like 15 or 16 years ago. And it's very similar to GURPS. You roll 3d6, you try and roll low under a target number. And like GURPS, you can build any type of character, a superhero, a space warrior, a cyborg pilot, a magic spellcaster. The difference, and I think the innovation over GURPS, is it treats whatever you do, whether you're shooting a laser beam out of your eyes like Superman or shooting someone with a gun from your hand, is it all works the same because it's the same in sort of a narrative sense. Now, the gun would have a disadvantage of it's removable. And so if someone takes the gun away from you, you can no longer shoot a bullet. The eyes are much harder to remove. Someone would have to blind you for it. So it would cost more points, but in the end, the two effects would be the same. Though, of course, one could have a higher damage value or some other special effect. So it is like GURPS, except you're building everything for your characters in terms of what the actual outcome is, which, unsurprising, I think this is a common theme with our generic systems, lends itself to a certain type of game, like the game it was originally created for before it became a generic system, which is superheroes. I think it works well for superheroes. And in which case you're not playing a generic system, you should just play Champions, which is the superhero version of this system. But the generic system, hero system, it is high crunch. It is incredibly detailed in how you can build your characters and build your rules.
Well, and we've talked a bit about Champions before. This is relatively unique in the games that we talk about. You know, how do we feel about this points-based character creation power system, right? Like what, this is an old school approach to balance and building characters. And I theoretically, like the idea, but in practice, I find this is a great way to have everyone either spend way too long on their characters or make bad characters or massively abuse the system.
Yeah. The game is kind of asking you to try and abuse the system so that the DM can then, mess with your weaknesses. So I don't hate that part of it. The part that I hate is that you do honestly need spreadsheet software. So Lotus 1, 2, 3 or something similar. Excel, if you can grab a copy of that, to build your character, because the power of leaping costs this many points, but when you put your advantages and disadvantages and durations and things on the power, you have to modify and do a ton of math. So it is, I think I would say, at the highest end of crunch, but if your players love building complex characters, you could not ask for a better system.
There may not be a better system for highly modular, very specific characters. Like if your players are like, I really want to do exactly this specific thing, and I don't want to reskin something, I don't want to compromise, hero system will let them do it.
But if your character is like, I have a sword, you're like, well, I'm going to have to teach you some math to determine how to build your sword power, right?
Right. Or if you're like, I'm a gumshoe detective, and I've got a revolver that I carry in my pocket, and I got a bottle of whiskey in the other, and I solve my problems through talking fast. And then we're like, okay, let's figure out your talking fast power and your revolver power, and here's some math.
No, you can do it. So I think
it can be done. It can be done.
Right. That is the vision of the hero system, is anything can be done. The question is, would it be good for a fast talking gumshoe detective game? Well, sort of only if your character was like the Question from the Justice League or DC Comics or whatever, because he has other powers too. And yes, fast talking is like a thing you can do in the system. It even like has the ability to be like, well, I have a power that's like a generic power, right? I have a utility belt or a bag of tricks or something. And I can modify this power to become another power. Well, that means it costs more, and you can do that. So like you can do that, like, oh, I have a bunch of dirty fighting techniques that I can deploy to any situation. Yeah, you can build that. The hero
system has thought of this. Is it? Yeah. The point is, though, is this the right system for many of for other things that we might discuss that are not power related?
If you care about like story and plot and character development and stuff like that, I don't think this is the system for you. If you care about building cool characters, which I think lends itself best to sort of a superhero, superpowered person type game, then this system is great. The combat system, once everyone gets a hang of it, can be really, really fun. Like the way like armor and damage interact and like knockback effects work can be really cool. But yeah, the buy-in is incredibly high. The complexity is incredibly high. The system is, it's another close to 500-page rule book.
You have to love building characters, which I do, and many people do, but that is not what a lot of people come to role-playing games for. They have a character idea, a character backstory. They want to embody that character. They may not care all that much about precisely how that character's powers function. And in that case, the hero system is not the right choice.
Yeah.
Is this good, Matt? For our metric? Would you describe this as good? Does it suck?
Kind of. Like if I was going to run a superhero game, maybe I'd just do like superhero, like Outgunned or the Year Zero engine superhero version for the Invincible comics. That would be me, but I would say it is.
I do like Champions. Champions is a good system. It's all the things we just talked about, but it's a good system for superheroes.
In my opinion, I like it way, way better than GURPS. So
okay,
there's that.
All right, better than GURPS.
Let's go to something completely the opposite of something like GURPS or the hero system.
Great. Let's talk about. Why don't we talk about Fate?
Okay.
Let's talk about.
I don't believe in it, Rob.
Neither do I, but it believes in you, Matt. And the Fate
walked into that one.
The Fate system is at this point a pretty well-established role-playing game, and it is an iteration on it emerged from a similar previous game called Fudge, And Fudge stands for Freeform Universal Donated or Do-It-Yourself Gaming Engine. You'll notice that that GURPS and Fudge are all these clever acronyms because that was the style of the day in the late 80s, early 90s was to make a word and then have it mean a bunch of things. And I can't remember if Fate is one of those, but now it's just Fate.
I think Fate now stands for nothing, and first came out in the early 2000s, if memory serves.
Yes, 2003. Fudge was on like Usenet in 1992.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, GURPS and Hero are both older than that. We're learning something about our generic systems. Anyway, Fate is a relatively simple system. It's mostly based on like skills. It's based on. It's also got I would say, I don't want to say proprietary dice, but sorta. It's got a bunch of dice with pluses and minuses. So it's an even simpler version of the same kind of thing as Genesis. You roll, you add up your pluses and your minuses. I don't know if I want to say that this is like the origin of it, but this is the an early iteration of the sort of invoking your aspects, invoking elements of your sort of a character personality or backstory or relationships to gain bonuses. Fate is built around these aspects and invoking or compelling them, where the GM will be like, oh, it says distracted by shiny things on your character sheet, and there's a gold coin on the table there. You feel compelled to grab it, and
you
to
can
power
deny that by costing you something, or you can give in to what the DM is tagging in your character and gain something. But this works positively as well if you have the fate aspect of I never give up on my friends or something like that. You could tag that to save a friend in an action roll and either re-roll your dice or get a huge bonus in the system. If you played a modern RPG that has this kind of like, well, you can spend a thing to gain a huge bonus that's kind of abstract and you maybe made it up yourself. It was first innovated by the Fudge Fate system.
And the sort of engine that powers all this is your fate points, which is a pool which replenishes and diminishes based on your actions, invoking and compelling, which I think is a really tidy little system. I think does a really good job of like pushing and pulling and making every decision interesting because you're sort of like managing your fate pool. I think in play it does a really good job of making every decision interesting and also making them count.
Yeah, there are no meta currencies in a lot of the systems we talked about, except for the Genesis system. But Fate is a heavy meta currency system. The Fate pool is maybe more important than like what's on your character sheet, and it represents the momentum and flow of the story, which is super fun, especially if you're like, hey, I just want some rules to tell this particular story. Yeah.
And I should mention that I'm talking mostly about Fate Core, but there's also Fate Accelerated and Fate. There's one even
Condensed.
Condensed. Personally, I think the core Fate system is pretty easy to pick up and run, but Accelerated and Condensed are even faster and better. So bear that in mind. I know we had somebody in the Discord who complained that we had not reviewed Fate adequately or something like that. So I don't really know what they're talking about because we reviewed Fate Core, which is still the current system. But we have a review of that and we talked about meta currencies in a different episode where we talked about Fate. I think it's a really neat little system. It is a good. I mean, many games have been built on Fate because it is actually very
aspects
easy
of Fate,
or aspects of Fate or built from Fate, because I think it's very easy to go from sort of like the core idea of like, here's your aspects and your skills and your stunts that you can do and structure something around that. I think it works really well for a lot of different types of stories. It's one of the better, I think, generic systems in that it's good for lots of things. But I think it does work best for anything you might see in the movies. Lots of different types of movies, but I think that you should be thinking cinematically if you're going to play a Fate game, because I think it works really well, both the way that it's written and the way that the game is designed.
Fate, I think, requires the game master to take a different perspective to storytelling, which works great for all types of stories, but especially ones that involve around character, like internal struggles and like drama, where like the forces of the world are forcing your characters to do things that they wouldn't normally want to do. Like a big part of like all of the Fate systems is kind of I forget the exact term for it, but like the give in. It's like, hey, I've rolled a thing against you where you're going to die, or you're all going to die, or a bad thing's going to happen to you, or you can just accept the consequences here. And that's good for you because you gain story points where you'll be able to come back later and overcome this obstacle. But now you're in the lair of, Dr. No's volcano, right? And you're tied up and hanging above sharks. And then we're going to go to the next scene. You can give in and accept the consequences. It's also really fun if you're good at like making up fun things on the side, right? There's kind of damage trackers and stuff like that. But a big thing is like if you get shot, you take a condition like gut shot. What does that mean? Well, the DM, it's a thing that's true now. The DM can tag it when it applies. Gut shot doesn't prevent you from talking, but it prevents you from like running or something, or whatever we decide it is at the table.
And this has the same upsides and downsides of any narrative RPG. We've talked about this a bunch. If you are comfortable with some ambiguity and your players are, and you're okay with sort of figuring out the narrative consequences together, then it's great. If you're looking for hard and fast rulings or concrete numbers, then you got to stick to GURPS, because you are going to have to, as a GM, do some adjudication and come up with some sort of narrative story beats and consequences, which, again, I think it's fun. I think it's good, but it is a very narrative heavy RPG.
I would say this game works best in campaigns and settings where like the personality traits of the characters are clearly defined, right? It's not great where like it's a campaign. Well, I'm just a level 1 wizard. Okay, that you could make that work, but it's better when it's like, no, I'm this clearly defined character, like this, my favorite character from cinema, because it's about creating cinematic story beats.
This is not Mothership or Dungeon Crawl Classics where you're Grog, the level 1 barbarian, right? Your players are defined characters with personalities and drives and interests and connections, right? You're not showing up with a level 1 mook and maybe you'll give them a backstory if they survive, which I think most people want that instead of the other thing, but it is definitely a game where you are coming with an established character or how a character will grow in your mind.
Excellent. I think we have a whole episode on Fate that you can listen to if you want. The only other thing I'll say is, in my opinion, the downside of Fate is that rolling the dice themselves is very like mechanically and like physically unsatisfying, and that normally the dice like don't do a lot. They like add a 1 or a -1 or a nothing. And it just feels undramatic for the dice roll. Everything else about the system is very dramatic.
Yeah, to go by our main metric, I think this is good. I think it's really good. It's a really well written, beautifully designed book. It's smaller than your average RPG book. It fits nicely. It's short. I find the base system a little bit it doesn't really like grab me. But that's okay. It is something that you can build on top of, and it functions really well as is. So it's good.
Yeah. Okay. Since you just talked about Fate, let me add one that is like, at least in my mind, I don't know if this is exactly correct. It's essentially, if Fate is not crunchy enough or complicated enough for you, if you wish there was more like driving the characters to change, and if you wish that the like action role had more nuance, like the Jinsys system. And of course, I'm speaking about the Cortex system by Cam Banks. And it is very similar to Fate in that you kind of have traits. You can there's sort of a way to like tag aspects. The role, however, is very dramatic because you have your traits are represented by dice from a D4 to a D12, like the step dice system, and you roll a pool of them, and then the GM always rolls an opposition pool, and then you kind of play a little game where you decide which ones you're going to use for the like results of this, and which ones the DMs are going to use to look at the consequences. And there's even like a mini game where like, oh, if I take my lower results, I'll gain more, essentially fate points, plot points in the Cortex system that I can use later. So I can choose to like have a lesser result or fail here. But it is very much the same type of like story and narrative driven system. The additions beyond this more complicated role is the DM has a meta currency. I think it's called the Doom Pool. And like there are, unlike Fate, where it's just like, well, create an aspect or a new skill to define your character, there are like lists of how to like make distinctions and power sets and things like that, and a substantial amount of DM advice, and like a full list of crafting skills and archetypes that you can use with those skills if you want to.
Yeah. So Cortex, of all the ones we've talked about, is the one that I have the least experience with and familiarity with. It's also, I think, the newest, the freshest of our generic systems. It came out in 2020.
Yeah.
And
I think it was based off of an earlier, like maybe the like Firefly system came out before,
yeah.
and it was based on that or something.
Something like that.
Yeah.
But this sort of like core mechanic is, again, I think it's nice. I think it's interesting. It's, Matt, I think you're right to identify this as like crunchier than Fate. Not super crunchy, but definitely more crunch, more decision making, more numbers, more math.
Yeah. It is like Fate. It is really trying to get you to think about a campaign in terms of story beats and like arcs for particular characters. As opposed to, despite it having like, hey, you have like attributes and skills, and each of those have a number assigned to them. It is very much simulating story as opposed to simulating some kind of reality.
Yeah, I've been thinking about running something in the system for a while, or it's been on my big list of things I'd like to try, because I like the symmetry between the GM and the player, right? The player has hero dice, the GM has a doom pool. You roll the same dice or similar dice, and that's how sort of like the story moves forward. I don't have a good sense how this plays out in practice, but I like the idea. I think it's a really interesting design. How does it work as a generic system, Matt, do you think?
I think it works pretty well for basically how I came to it, and how I think it fits in my mind is like, if you're if you tried Fate and you're like, I wish there was more here, it works really well. If you haven't tried a system like this before, maybe you should just give, like Fate Accelerated or Condensed a go and see if you like that first. I guess because the step die system is really flexible and the pool building, declaring like an action and like a dramatic roll can be a lot of fun and involves maybe even more narrative description than Fate, because like in some ways of running the system, like as was used in one of the like Marvel ones, you decide, hey, am I working together? Am I working alone? Am I leading the group to do this action? And then I get a different die for each of those. I will also say is that the like graphic design and layout and explanation of the rules um, is really quite good.
Yeah.
And the advice for like, hey, by the way, y'all, this is a generic system. How do you like create something that's fun, that builds on the cool ideas that you have in your head? Here are some examples. They do a good job of that.
This is a really lovely book. And we don't have time to go into the detail, but I do really like, they have, in my opinion, better rules for how to actually like make this generic system a bit less generic. Like if you want to take sort of like Cortex Prime and modify it, they have this cool idea called traits and prime sets, which are uh, groups of abilities that you can make available to fit a certain type of setting. So, for example, your grim fantasy would have attributes plus skills, but superheroes would have affiliations plus powers, and within those, there's sub abilities and whatnot. Like I said, I don't have enough experience with this to judge how well it works. I like the idea. I think it's really like nicely done.
Yeah, no, they really try to build a generic system for like narrative-ish games, that's going to help you get to where you want to go in the rules, and that's worth, I think, worth a lot.
Yeah.
I guess the downside is it has a little more buy-in, and if you're looking for something where you're just like, well, I want my characters to have a gun and then I want them to have a bigger gun, well, maybe it's not the best system for that.
It is complicated. It's I think good complicated. I think it all makes sense. It all works together, but it is not, in my opinion, it's not like pick up and play. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of charts, a lot of flow charts, a lot of symbols. I do like symbols. I'm not mad about any of these things, but I'm looking at a page and there's a flow chart and a bunch of numbers around this person's head and like skills with step dice and shapes. There's so many shapes on this page, Matt.
Yeah.
I think this is interesting, and I don't know. We maybe ought to talk about this in greater detail because it is sort of different from the others that we're talking about because it's newer. And I think it has absorbed a lot of design knowledge that didn't exist when they were making Fate and GURPS and the hero system. But yeah.
Yeah, it is definitely, of the ones we're talking about, one of the latest generations of generic systems. All right, Rob, I want to talk about two more systems. What's your last one?
Let me talk about one real quick because it's relatively simple. I want to talk about the Cypher system. And the Cypher system is a Monty Cook original, a offshoot or a evolution of Numenera, which is his science fantasy epic adventure game. And the Cypher system, and I, a fan may disagree with me about this, but I think the things that make it distinct, and I don't mean this in a bad way, is that it's a D20 system, but it's sort of like core ideas that it's really simplified success and failure. So everything has a difficulty. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. And the DC is your difficulty times 3. So a difficulty 1, you have to roll a 3. A 2 is a 6, etc., so on and so forth. And most of the work in the Cypher system comes from moving that difficulty up and down. You're not adding numbers so much as you are. If you have the right skill, the difficulty goes down. If you have the right item, the difficulty goes down. That sort of thing. If it's you're under duress, the difficulty goes up. I think this is a very nice system, and Monty Cook iterated on this for Invisible Sun, which does something very similar. Everything has sort of like a rating, and everything is built around the rating. I think it's a very nice and simple way to think about things. It is, from a GM's perspective, way easier to come up with the sort of like correct difficulty for something than it is in Dungeons and Dragons, which this is clearly a offshoot of.
And it's nice for players in that, like, if you've played a Dungeons and Dragons like game, you know about rolling D20s, and rolling high is good. And you've got numbers.
It's very simple to move from D20 to the Cypher system, which is an advantage for it.
Until we got to this, this is like a minor point, but I think it's really important, is that a lot of generic systems, especially the story-ish ones, like, they're not very like item heavy. Like finding a cool thing is like, okay, it gives you a temporary power, but unless it's part of your character sheet, it's gone after this scene. And this game does items really well and interesting.
It does. Yeah. So the cool, like the good and bad thing and the unique thing about the Cypher system is that it is built, you might guess by the name, around ciphers. It do not have to be items, but in Numenera they generally are. And it could be a blessing from a god. It could be something that you said that makes you feel good. Like it can be anything, but it's basically like a one-time use bonus. And in Numenera, this was cool because the whole gameplay loop was going into a weird science fantasy dungeon and finding a weird who's he, what's it, and like what does it do, and how do you use that? And that was that's still like one of the great things about Numenera is it's a dungeon delving game, but it's more about finding weird, fun loot. And so the Cypher system has been applied, it's been used to make a couple of other games besides Numenera, but I do think the sort of weakness of it as a generic system is that if you're not going to engage with the Cypher part of it, there's not much going on. If it is a type of game where you find lots of cool stuff, like a science fiction game where you're exploring an abandoned space station or going down to alien planets, or a fantasy dungeon delving adventure or science fantasy like Numenera, it's great. But I think if you're not engaging with the ciphers, it's a pretty bare bones system.
I think one advantage that I really like about it is it is that fine line between, like in Fate and Cortex, you're kind of always being like pretty narratively creative. But sometimes some players feel, well, if you're always being narratively creative, there's no like room for like innovation and clever at the table, kind of out of character kind of thinking. And I think the Cypher system, by like having this kind of, this original role here represents the like physics and difficulty of the task, but the players have all these pools associated with their attributes that they can kind of spin points to put effort in, and then they can, if they describe their action in a different way, I can reduce their difficulty. Like, a lot of this like creativity in how the GM advice is given is really nice. I think, unlike all the other systems we've talked about, except for Fate, this is all the players roll all the dice system, which I think is generally maybe not what everyone wants, but is a good idea for a generic system. So
I like it.
Yeah. I like the ability to put more effort into certain roles. I think that's a cool innovation.
Yeah. And this is another, I think, medium crunch setting.
Yes.
And but I think it's good medium crunch. I do think this is pretty easy to pick up, especially if you were coming from Dungeons and Dragons. I think that it allows you to do interesting things as a player with some caveats. I think that combat can be pretty dull unless you're using a bunch of neat ciphers. But I do think I really like getting a fun thing and figuring out what to do with it. One of the campaigns that I enjoyed the most was a Numenera campaign. But generally, my feeling on Cypher is that I don't know that it works all that well as a generic system, but I love Numenera, so
Yeah.
I think it's good.
Yeah, what kind of campaign is this for? I would say one where you do want like characters to be defined by like a lot of like what they have and what they find. So to me, that makes sense for science fantasy, even things like cyberpunk or like a future,
I think it'd be good for cyberpunk.
Future game kind of stuff.
Might be cool for like for a heist, adventure. You're thieves and you have all sorts of like cool equipment. If you love the part of Tom Clancy novels where he masturbatorily describes like military equipment, then
Yes,
like that's probably like that's might be a good setting for something like this. Yeah.
All right, Rob. Last one I was thinking about, and listen, listeners, this might be part one of X.
There's a lot more of these, so
sure,
consider this part one. Yeah.
But I thought about talking about the basic role playing game system, which is, just, hey, you have a percentile dice and you roll under it. And if you roll under it by a certain amount, it's a critical success. You have just a number for this. Skills can add to it. Lots of games have innovated off of this, like Mothership. And it is pretty much I would say simpler, mechanically simpler at the table version of like GURPS and the hero system, but it is just kind of like a physics engine simulator. So if you want one of those, maybe this is the one you want because all the math is there in front of you, except you do have to do extra math when determining because you have to half and fifth things, which is very frustrating.
Yeah.
Rob, off the top of your head, you have 47 in this type of check. What's 1/5 of that?
1/5 of 47.
You couldn't figure it out. You couldn't figure it out. See, this is the problem. That's why you need a little chart next to you.
Do a little chart.
But I think maybe we should talk about Savage Worlds. Is that a good idea, or do you want to talk about the
sure?
basic
No, let's talk about
role-playing
Savage Worlds.
Right.
I skipped it initially because we talked about it a lot. We did I think multiple episodes on it. But
I think we should remind people that it exists.
It is one of my favorite generic systems, and I think that it is similar to Genesis in that it's designed for a certain type of game, and you can really see the DNA of Deadlands in everything that is Savage Worlds related.
Yeah.
But I think it works pretty well across like a wide variety of genres and types of play. I still, I'm biased. I've run games and played in them. I really like Savage Worlds. It's got a step die system, right? Your skills or abilities go from D4 to D6 to D8 to D10, D12, etc. Very simple. You roll a bunch of dice. What stops it from being, or you roll a couple of dice. What stops it from being kind of ho-hum is that you have the wild die that always gives you a chance for like a little extra. Maybe it explodes. That's fun. It's got the card initiative system, which I kind of use for everything now because it's just way more fun to deal cards to my players than it is to have them roll and consult a chart. And it's got bennies. It's got a very simple
meta currency. Yes.
Very simple meta currency. You hand out poker chips to your players. Everyone loves it. I think this is a really, really good system. I think the limitations
to build characters, it's like a point system.
It's a point system.
Yeah.
It's also relatively simple. You're basically picking your sort of like array of abilities and then a handful of basically feats. It's very simple. It's a little. It's I guess like a little like.
It's a
number,
point.
Yeah,
calling
points.
both Savage Worlds and the hero system a point system is technically
it's
correct.
Technically true.
The best kind of correct, but they're very different types of point systems. One is, here's a pool of 500 points.
Yeah.
Calculate the cost of each one. Savage Worlds is like, here's a 2-point ability and a 1-point ability.
Right.
Yeah. Pick up to 3 points among these 2 and 1 point
You can
abilities.
spend a lot of time on Savage Worlds character creation, but mostly that's just making the decision. It's just because there's a lot of good things to choose, and it's picking them. It's less trying to do the math of precisely arranging your powers so that you get the maximum benefit from it.
Yeah, I find that often narrative systems tend to be less deadly because the more interesting consequence, especially when you have strongly defined characters, is not that the character dies, but that something terrible or interesting or complicated happens to them. Savage Worlds is not exactly a narrative system. It has those narrative elements for the bennies, but they're very action oriented, but it can be a pretty deadly system, like the basic role-playing game or something. Mm-hmm. It's like, hey, you got shot. This gun is powerful. You are weak. But unlike basic role playing, which I would say is this is really good for regular people. Savage Worlds is really good for regular people plus. Right? They got a little something extra, right? They're like original X-Men.
Yeah. It is like Genesis pulp action. It's for Indiana Jones. It's for Dick Tracy. It's for Doc Savage. It's for Star Wars. It's you're regular people, but you got a little bit of extra oomph, and that oomph is represented by your traits and by the bennies, which are basically sort of like your narrative. Basically your plot armor. And I love
it's not
this
for
system.
Superman or Batman level.
Right.
It's for Dick Tracy.
That's right. It's for street level heroes, right? It's for Luke Cage or Daredevil or Iron Fist. It's for guys who've got a little bit of extra, but guys and gals, Jessica Jones as well, who have a little bit of extra, but who can definitely be taken down by a lucky shot or a powerful opponent. And I love this because the balance feels so good because in narrative games, it's hard to feel threatened, but in Savage Worlds, somebody will roll, a wild card, a particularly tough enemy will roll a crazy good hit, and you can soak that with a Benny, right? You can you're never going to go down without any warning whatsoever, but I love the swings in Savage Worlds. It feels like the action is really high intensity. It's a little, I love Savage Worlds. We've talked about it a bunch. It can be sort of a little limited. I actually kind of wish that it had a bit more crunch. And if you're not doing something that is well established, like a Western or something you'd find in 1930s comic books, then the options are relatively bare bones. But I think it works so well for the types of stories that are that sort of high action, street level combat stuff. I think it's so good. Just for high adventure of any kind, pirates, space opera,
sure, yeah,
whatever. So it's one of my favorites. It has its limitations. I do think it's pretty easy for new players to pick up. I think that once you grasp, because rolling everything is just pick the right dice size for this and for that, add your wild dice, roll it. It's honestly it's different, but it's pretty easy to pick up.
I would say so we've talked about a bunch of generic systems. We've talked some that are more story simulation like Cortex and Fate and Genesis. And we talked about some that are like trying to simulate reality, like GURPS or the basic role-playing game or the hero system a little bit. But of those, Savage Worlds is doing that, but it is trying to make the combat and action of reality fun, as opposed to, what would it really be like to be in a gunfight? Actually, it'd be terrible. Okay, sure.
If
people
basic
would fire
role
their
playing, you'll
guns
just
at
get
each
shot
other,
and die. Yeah,
which maybe makes it great for things like, I don't know, Call of Cthulhu, which is one of the things that's part of its like DNA,
or Mothership, right? That's what you want to happen.
Those things to happen. But yeah, Savage Worlds is like, instead of it just being two people shooting at each other until one person takes a bullet and starts dying, sounds not fun for a story. Savage Worlds turns that into like a fun little game. Oh, what if our violence could be a fun little game?
If you want your violence, your action to feel like a movie or a comic book, Savage Worlds does that really well. It does it excellently, I think.
Okay. All right, Rob. Well, listeners, I hope if this is something you're interested in, we've tried to give you like a fair appraisal and like shake of what's out there, of some of the possibilities. There are more, but I would say don't listen to the advice that's just like, well, if you want to run your own campaign, run it in any generic system. Try and pick one that hits the tones of your campaigns, because despite their, sort of pitch and claim of this is a universal or a generic role-playing system, they all have certain types of tones and assumptions built in, or mechanics that lead to certain type of players and play. And so think about that before you choose.
Yeah. Yeah. There are reasons to go with a generic system, good ones even, but it is there are pitfalls that you ought to be aware of. And we hope that we have informed you of some of them.
Picking a generic system, it's like buying a used car. It's never going to be easy. You got to shop around. You got to test them out. You got to read these like blue books. You got to go read the Yelp reviews on the Nissan Sentra.
Yeah. Okay, listeners. Thank you for coming with us on this journey of neutrality.
Yes. If you have a favorite generic system, drop us a line at dmofnone@gmail.com or hit us up on Discord. Tell us about it.
Yeah. We'll almost certainly at some point do a part 2 of this, because there's more we want to talk about. If you want to hear more about all kinds of things, be sure to head over to the Patreon at patreon.com/dungeonmasterofnone. And as always, thanks for listening, everybody, and keep rolling them dice.